Today we're talking with photographer and author Stephen Hilger. Stephen's photographs are in the collections of the Los Angeles County Museum of Art and the New Orleans Museum of Art, and have appeared in publications such as New York Magazine and the New York Times. His recently published book, In the Alley, is described as a subversive portrait of Beverly Hills. Welcome, Stephen, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Kelly. It's wonderful to be here at the library, and it's so great to see you again. And thank you for your help with the project. I hope we can talk about your role in it later.
Oh, yes, I'm excited to talk about the role the library played in the creation of this great book. Before we dive into the book, I'd like you to tell us just a little bit about your background. You're born in LA, right?
Sure. I was born and raised in Los Angeles and went to New York for college and grad school. And I've been mostly in New York and a few other places, including New Orleans, since then. But my work as a photographer is still very invested in Los Angeles, and I'm really compelled to visit Los Angeles as much as I can, a few times a year. And as it turns out, I can't stay away and I can't stop photographing the city.
All right. Most fascinating thing, obvious thing about In the Alley is that it's in the Leporello format, which means that it's sort of accordion fold.
Right. So the book is a collection of photographs of the alleys in Beverly Hills, and I chose the panoramic format to really have a kind of immersive view, and also the Leporello or accordion format also to be able to really walk through the alleys as I did in the process of making the work, and try to give the viewer that experience of seeing what I saw behind the homes in Beverly Hills as opposed to the front.
You really do get the sense of motion or of walking through the alley with that format. Okay, so let's look at the photos, and you can comment on any process or anything that strikes you particularly.
The way I arranged the sequence of works in the book is really somewhat connected to a narrative about light. So the pictures aren't in a chronological order. The pictures were made over the course of about a year.
Okay.
And, sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon, but looking for a certain quality of light that would make the alleys and everything in the alleys, from the garbage cans to the security signs to the gates and the walls and the people that we see in the alleys, describing them, but in a way that's kind of revelatory in that
dramatic
experience of being there.
Oh, what I loved about this one is that the graffiti is like its own climbing vine, almost. On this side, we have a vine covering the cinder block wall, and over here, the graffiti is sort of serving the same purpose. I love that.
Right. I think as a photographer, you're intensely looking at things, and even though maybe at first everything seems similar in the back, you start to really see different motifs that emerge in the work. And so, of course, I was excited to see that graffito and think a little bit about someone young who had made that, and thinking about what it was like for myself to be, kind of growing up and sometimes moving through those alleys. And but yeah, photographically, aesthetically, the way it kind of matches those vines helps make the picture.
Well, this alley does sort of give because you mentioned that the alleys in Beverly Hills are larger and wider than alleys in almost any other neighborhood, even other wealthy neighborhoods.
Right. I think it's something that Matthew Spector mentions in the essay about the book. And yeah, it's really ironic that these alleys, we think of an alley as this really debased space, but it seems like they're very tidy in Beverly Hills and very maintained and bigger than some streets you might drive on. Absolutely.
And the trash cans are.
They're huge. Matthew writes about them as, I think, the venti cup of garbage cans, and I mean they're larger than human scale. So it tells us a lot about the kind of amount of waste that is produced in a wealthy neighborhood. I was constantly moving through that process, and really the process is a lot about taking a walk, and what do you see on that walk, and what do you experience on that walk, and looking through the frame of the camera and making decisions. But those decisions that are made pretty quickly. They're made somewhat unconsciously, and it's kind of constantly moving down. And occasionally, so most of the pictures have that kind of angle of the side, but then sometimes you really see what's in front of you, and you see that longer, more perspective view, which really helps locate us in the alley.
Yeah. It's very well maintained back of the house, but it's very bleak in a way. And here it goes, use tennis court for entry.
Right. I suppose signals the wealth, but also just kind of, these two closed off doors, these double garage, I guess also, for multiple cars, but I feel like there's really no way into this particular house.
I'm curious about did you ever hear people in the backyard?
Yeah, I think, sometimes you do, and sometimes you hear maybe some kids in a pool and some music playing, but I think the thing that I would hear most would be the engine of a leaf blower, the sound of clippings. It's really, the neighborhood is so dependent on this class structure division, this system of being maintained.
So here's this great photo, which I believe is in the middle of the...
Yeah, it's about the middle of the book.
And we don't see very many people in the photographs, right. But here...
The garage was open, and I saw this car, and I thought, this is at an event. As I said earlier, this is really something to see. And I set my tripod down and sort of looked through, and then suddenly this housekeeper had appeared, and it was very fast. I think there's this slight moment of recognition of each other, and just kind of made the picture, and then just kind of moved on. And it's a sort of picture that there's a very brief experience that we share together, but I really don't know, there wasn't really a conversation, there wasn't really kind of a long exchange, but she's a very important character in this book, who kind of, represents those who do work, those who do, work in the neighborhood, commute into the space. And there's a few different cases of people that we see that kind of represent different points of views of being in the alley.
So in this one, we see another interesting sort of sign of life in the alley, with this bicycle leaning up against the fence.
Right.
It's sort of I like the light in this shot also.
What James Welling once described as a photographer's dream, the light in Los Angeles. I mean, it's just has such a material quality. What I tended to do is really overexpose the film, which kind of made this pronounced quality of light and grain, and it was just kind of like an emotional thing that I did. But something else I want to point out in this picture is there's actually a person here peering over the fence. Oh my gosh! And he's kind of hard to see because he's just glimpsing over, he's returning our gaze, he's looking at us, and I think of him as the kind of homeowner. I think Matthew Spector in the book described him, perhaps as a landscaper or a gardener. I think he can be any of those things. But he's, looking out from the house back at us.
Right.
Right. Should I turn the page?
Next slide, as we like to say.
Right. Exactly.
Oh, here again, I'm not a photographer. I did read in the thing about what do you call this, a lens flare?
Yeah, lens flare. Exactly.
Pentagonal, and it sort of reflects the shape of the...
Yeah, I mean, it has what it does is it reflects the shape of this tennis fence here, but it also, what it physically is it's the aperture of the lens, and there's these blades in the lens that is called the diaphragm that opens and closes, and so we see that kind of camera present itself through the picture. And so to me it really underscores the fact that it's a work of art, it's a it's a photograph and it's really kind of calling out in the same way that maybe someone marked the graffiti on the fence that I was there seeing this.
So you left a mark. Okay, next one. Oh, dogs.
Yeah, dogs, but I was glad there was a fence there because they were pretty noisy and pretty excited to see me, and they're obviously also that sort of, alarm call of the dog and kind of intimidating, but, beautiful animals and make a great picture.
There's a little bit of sense of foreboding in some of these.
I think so, and I think that I physically felt that when I was there and the dogs were barking and making a lot of noise, and I knew there was that fence there, but there's something inside of you too that starts to, your heart accelerates a bit.
And it emphasizes, again, the difference in the spaces.
Right,
the space you're in.
Yeah, I think the sense that even though the alleys are public spaces, they really don't feel public. They feel very private and very patrolled. And that has a lot to do with what we see, like the security signs, and we see and we hear the dogs, and not the most inviting of spaces.
Okay, thanks. Oh, here we go. The rich people are just like us, throwing their mattresses out in the street for bulky item pickup.
Right. Yeah, so it's actually, I think this might be a good opportunity for me to talk a little bit about how I came to photograph in the alley. And I had spent some time when I was actually still in college, and I was on a break home from New York, and I started being interested in photographing the interiors of my grandmother's house. I realized through this, one picture that I had made of her bed when she wasn't sleeping on it, that there were so many things that kind of indicated change that was happening. And I'm really interested in the idea of photography being able to, write down and document change. But she had left the light on, and there was a commode that had been moved into the room, and the sheets were undone. And so that started a long project photographing in her home. Eventually, she passed away, and that really became the logical end of the project. But the way that I started photographing the alleys was I actually went out her back door and went into the alleys and started just photographing without really giving it much thought. And over time, I developed, or I began to understood more of an idea that the alleys were these really politically charged spaces that were designed to, create help support a certain lifestyle for the inhabitants. So there's that one aspect of the work, but there's also this dual aspect of the work of mourning and thinking about, my grandmother passing away and dying. And actually, this is her mattress.
It is. Yeah. Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
So this is from one of the early.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's incredible. This one I get a real sense, sort of decay almost, and I also like that all this part's in the shadows, but then over here on the pool slide into an empty pool is in bright sunlight.
Right. Yeah. No. This has a lot of contrast, and it also just has a lot of layers of. What's kind of happening in the back. Things are decaying, but we go back to that kind of sense of play from childhood. Although, I don't know what's happened here. Where'd they go? What's next? Are they going to tear down the house? Or why is the fence down low? Why can we see inside? Again, it's another kind of glimpse, another opportunity to see something, to learn something about these spaces that we usually don't see.
Yeah, you get much more. I mean, this is really, you get a view of the back yard where you didn't with the others.
Exactly.
You just get a hint.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love these hands pointing the way of global science productions.
Yeah, whatever that is, that's something that I've always kind of wondered about. Is it an actual company, or is it a kids club, or some? I think it's more of kind of, some sort of clubhouse or something like that in the
I
back of a
know.
house.
I'm very curious about Global Science Productions. And it looks like they painted this wall at some point, but they didn't want to bother to redo the lettering. See how it's kind
Oh,
of
right.
like,
Yeah.
so
Well,
they
you
just
see,
painted around it.
you see that, and you see those kind of layers accumulate in the back of the house, and not too much worry about fixing it up.
And it's pointing even at them. It's not really looking at anything.
And then it points to a security sign. I mean,
I was going to say, it's not very
so,
inviting where
which-
it points to.
which we see just little glimpses of. They're very small kind of thumbnails in these pictures, but it's actually something I'm working on now. I've gone back to the alleys and I'm just focusing on the signs themselves, really tight with a different format camera, a square format camera, and a black and white image. But I was just thinking about these signs are, they're really, I realized, I think just yesterday I was photographing and I realized that there's less and less of them as certain houses get torn down and rebuilt. And these are really a vestige of the way that security used to exist as this sign projecting that the house is patrolled or the house is protected. But now it's really surveillance, cameras, voices coming on saying you're watched and so on and so forth. And so I actually called some of the numbers on these signs and they just don't go anywhere because I think so many of these businesses are gone. So I'm really trying to just kind of capture that little idiosyncratic but important aspect of the visual history of the city.
Now where is this? Is this a park?
Yeah,
or-
so this is the end of the alley looking down towards Santa Monica Boulevard, which it's kind of looking out onto, this is a thin little park that runs along the boulevard. I don't know if you saw this one too, because sometimes it takes time to see it, but what we actually see we see some men sleeping in the background on the bench. It becomes the third picture that really has that human presence. And in this case, it's the sort of, unhoused person on the margins who sort of gravitates towards the shade and the, verdancy of Beverly Hills, but doesn't really, doesn't have a home to move in. This made me think of this great film, Down and Out in Beverly Hills, that Matthew Spector writes about. This kind of moment of going from the alley into the house is this like huge experience. And then towards the end of the movie, we see him making the decision to leave the house and leave the lifestyle and go back to the world he knows. And so this alley is really just this kind of like back edge of what separates one lifestyle from another. Yeah.
There is here is the accompanying essay by novelist Matthew Spector, and then your conversation with James Welling are also in this. That's included in the book.
Right, and we thought that we would tuck it into the book as a pocket, so that it could just allow the pictures to, be one continuous work.
So what you mentioned a little bit about the genesis of the idea of shooting in the alleys, but when did you get the idea to do the book and then come up with using the Leporello?
That's a great question. So I had actually, made these pictures a while ago, about 20 years ago. And I had, simultaneously been working on different photographic projects in LA. And I put these pictures aside for a while. And then there was something that happened a few years ago that my father died. And it got me to, my father and mother were living in the house that my grandmother lived in and I had photographed in. So leading up to my father's death, I was, started to really renew this interest in photographing inside their homes. And then when he passed away, I also just thought I had this kind of compulsion to deal with this work and find a finished form for it. And I had thought through the years of a book. And I thought that the panoramic format of the photographs actually presented certain challenges for making a book. And so I was speaking with Peter Caiaphas, who's a photographer based in New York, who published this book through Purple Martin Press. And even before he had agreed to work on the book with me, he was in my studio and we were looking at pictures, and I was telling him a little bit about my sort of problem putting these in a book, because oftentimes when you have a photograph or a image across a bound book, you get this gutter and you get this kind of deep space. And so he just kind of whipped out a piece of paper and started folding it up, and he said, did you ever think of this accordion format, this Leporello format? And I just thought, that's a really great idea. So I made the maquette where, by hand putting these photographs together. And what's really nice is that with the Leporello, you have to not just think about the sequence of images, but you also have to think about what's right next to each other, what's adjacent to each other, because I'd really love the idea of when it's displayed, and I'd like to exhibit it in a kind of opened format so people can walk across the whole book. And so worked with Peter and Purple Martin Press to get this book made as a Leporello. And I really like the idea of the physicality of the book, of the pages, where it's part book, part object, and hopefully it really gives someone a glimpse and a taste of an experience of walking through these spaces that many people might not have thought about or
right. So that's
experienced.
what's so nice. You shine a light on, tell you something, or tell you a story that you don't. At first, you think, oh, it's an alley. There's nothing there.
No, I really identify with that. I mean, when you talk about these things that you see in space that we can read, really kind of signal something, and I'm oftentimes looking for motifs like that, or just unavoidably running into them. And it's something that in my work about LA, more expansively outside of Beverly Hills, I've been, doing work through the years where I just concentrate on certain streets, like Beverly Boulevard or Western Boulevard, often the big boulevards. And, you see these different kind of signals, like for instance, maybe newspaper boxes now empty. Well, in Los Angeles, people used to stop and on their morning commute and buy a newspaper, and now these just kind of empty boxes, and they're kind of used for storage, or maybe a independent community newspaper, or maybe as a bathroom, or
sometimes you see empty soda cups in there.
And they kind of harness the light, but I like to think that just paying attention to these things that kind of were important and they're gonna change, and I want to write them down like a historian would write them down before they can no longer be accessed.
I first met Stephen when he came into the history department, and he wanted maps that showed alleys. Mm-hmm. You think, oh, that's not so difficult, but it is, because most maps do not include alleys. And here's the Thomas Brothers map of Beverly Hills, and you have the streets, but you don't see any alleys.
Well, Callie, I'm grateful that on that Friday afternoon, very late in the day, that I found you and that you helped find this beautiful map for me, because I was, looking at the alleys in Beverly Hills, I was very interested in the fact that, like I said before, they're public spaces and they're public streets, but they don't appear on the maps that one uses to navigate the city.
Right, so they're hidden spaces in a way,
yes,
because they're in the back of the houses,
right,
but they're really hidden spaces in the fact that they're not indicated on most maps.
So it's not really meant, someone made this decision that that's not going to be on the map, that's not going to be seen.
It's very interesting. So, but we do find them on the Sanborn maps, and so I guess the Sanborn are insurance maps, and I guess maybe city planning maps too, the very sort of proprietary maps. Exactly. But the Sanborn fire insurance maps, if you're not familiar with them, I was not familiar with them before I started working in the history department, were used to inform insurance companies of the fire risks of neighborhoods, of specific buildings that are...
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. It's this, the most kind of private map, different from the Thomas Guide, which everyone at a certain point in California, before we were navigating around using GPS and our phones, everyone had a Thomas Guide in their automobile. And that's how they would navigate around. But this map really highlights the idea that this, kind of property is tied to wealth and the importance of the homeowners of ensuring their wealth. And so it's this kind of like ultra private way, but yet it was very satisfying to see these alleys depicted. Perhaps you could explain how it captures time, because it doesn't seem to have been made only in one moment. It seems like there's lots of additions.
Every time they updated the maps, which was not annually, they pasted the changes right on top of the previous page. And you can see that here. You can see things that are pasted on. And you can see this one was originally done in 1926, but each time they added on, updated it, you can see they put a little page, and sometimes the streets changed. And then over here, we can see that the last correction made was in 1956. And here's the key that gives some clue to what the colors and the abbreviations mean.
What's totally fascinating to me about this, Kelly, is that it describes the growth of the city as you described, but in that description of the growth, there's also an erasure that happens where, because this map was added to physically with, smaller sheets of paper glued on and painted on, there's something that's now hidden underneath. There's something that was kind of lost or gone, some sort of change. One building was removed to create another. And I'm really actually excited to try and look at more of these maps and think about different landmarks that were built in LA and what existed before them, and sort of tracing that
well, that's
change.
very interesting that you mentioned that, because I worked with some people last summer and they were researching the Los Angeles River. And the Los Angeles River changed course many times and before it was cemented. But if you look at various ones, you could see, and you could literally see underneath the change, okay, the river used to go here, and that was pasted over, now went this way. And then in terms of the erasure of neighborhoods for boulevards or freeways, which is another case of erasure. But it's because people use these sample maps for all sorts of things. Genealogists use it to find, where their parents lived. Architects, residents use it to research the history of the house or the neighborhood, or to fight City Hall because they have to prove that, no, that addition was on there. But that's what I like about your use. It's such a creative
Well, thank you
use.
for bringing this to my attention, because I think that, it was something that I couldn't find. But then the interesting thing wasn't just finding the map, but finding the map and it being the Sanborn map, the insurance map, which really sort of highlighted something as structurally as far as the planning of the neighborhood. And if you pass the book in the alley over, I can just show that, what we did working with the designer, Julie Fry, New York, is I made some photographs on the visit to the library of the maps and sent Julie the pictures. Then she actually, did some design work to kind of inverse the map and make it, more colorful cover. But we can see that alley is now highlighted and kind of run through the image on the book, when the streets are kind of disappear.
Thank you, Stephen, so much for sharing your work with us today. It's such an interesting way of looking at Los Angeles and at Los Angeles history.
Well, thanks again, Kelly, for having me here. I couldn't think of a place I'd rather be than in the history department at the Los Angeles Public Library. I mean, I love being out on the street and making work, but I also love coming back into a space where I can research and find maps and books, and I'm totally honored to be here. So thank you for doing what you do and for having me.
Oh, thank you.